She was 10 years of age when she announced to him that she would one day become his wife. He laughed, a genuine, unhurried sound, dipped his head in acknowledgement, and then erased her from his memory entirely. She did not return the favor. Not at 15. Not at 18. Not across a full decade spent at a seminary in Bath, where his face drifted like a ghost through her quiet evenings. When she finally returned to London at the age of 20, she brought with her a single question that demanded an answer. Had she spent 10 years devoted to a man, or merely to a memory? He was 40 years of age. He had informed his mother, his club, and anyone bold enough to ask that he considered himself far too advanced in years to choose a bride, that the proper season for such things had long since passed him by. What he had concealed from everyone, and most ruthlessly from himself, was a simpler truth. No woman had ever stirred in him the feeling he believed he was supposed to recognize. Until one evening, a young woman stepped into his library, her attention fixed upon the bookshelves rather than upon him, and something in a neglected corner of his mind went still. Subscribe and leave a comment. Have you ever found yourself waiting for someone who had no idea you were there? There are moments in a person's life so brief, so completely unremarkable as they occur, that they pass without ceremony, without anyone pausing to take note. A door left open, a name spoken by accident, a sentence finished before anyone thought to interrupt. The night of October the 17th, 1800, was precisely such a moment. It arrived draped in candlelight and the scent of roasted pheasant, tucked neatly inside an evening the world had no cause to remember. Lady Whitmore's autumn dinner was, by every reliable account, among the finer gatherings of the season. The drawing-room of Whitmore House on Grosvenor Square had been arranged with a single, deliberate purpose: to dazzle people who already owned everything. The most difficult audience there is. Crystal caught the trembling light of 50 candles, scattering reflections across every polished surface. Conversation moved between courses with the disciplined elegance of a river held firmly within its banks. Purposeful, contained. Duke Maximilian Royce, the 9th Duke of Ashvale, arrived at precisely 7:30 and immediately became the axis around which the room turned. Not through any effort of his own, this was simple gravity. A gentleman of 30, unmarried, bearing one of the most ancient titles in England, commanding a fortune that required 3 separate accountants to manage. Such a man bends the atmosphere of any room he enters. The ladies smiled a fraction too widely. The mothers lifted their chins by careful, practiced degrees. Even the gentlemen adjusted their posture without realizing it, as though standing near such a figure demanded something straighter in the spine. Maximilian bore it all, with the particular patience that comes not from virtue, but from long repetition. He had no cause to believe this evening would prove different from any other. He had moved through these social waters since he was 19. He recognized every shade of performance, every manufactured laugh, every calculated glance delivered from beneath artfully lowered lashes. He bore no resentment toward it. He simply watched. And in watching, he had learned to keep a careful distance between himself and the counterfeit warmth that everyone around him seemed so desperate to produce. Somewhere after the second course, he extracted himself from a relentless conversation about hunting estates and escaped into the corridor. The hallway held fewer candles than the drawing-room. That was precisely its appeal. He stood by the window at the far end, gazing down at the square below, grateful for 30 seconds of silence. He sensed her before he saw her. A small sound, not quite a gasp, more like the breath of someone caught doing something they already knew they shouldn't be doing. He turned. She stood at the top of the servants' staircase, half swallowed by shadow. She had clearly come down from the upper floor, where the younger members of the household had been tucked away hours ago. 10 years old, perhaps? A white nightgown, dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. Her eyes found his, and what struck him was the stillness behind them. A composure so complete it separated her instantly from every soul he had spoken to that evening. Most children, caught wandering a house alive with adults, would have bolted or wept. This one simply watched him, studied him really, with the careful gravity of a person weighing a newly encountered problem. Then she stepped forward into the candlelight, as though the corridor belonged to her. "You are the Duke." Not a question, a classification. He discovered, with faint surprise, that he was not the least bit annoyed. "I am, yes. And you are very much not supposed to be in this part of the house." "I couldn't sleep." She said it with the unshakable certainty of someone stating a law of nature, something that required neither defense nor apology. "The candles smell different when there are so many. Waxy. It comes up through the floorboards." He studied her. She held his gaze without a flicker of nervousness, without the faintest trace of performance. The very things every other person beneath that roof had offered him all evening. There was something quietly steadying in her plainness of manner. "Well then, what is your name?" "Ada Pemberton. Lady Whitmore is my aunt." A short, purposeful silence. "My mother says you are the most eligible gentleman in all of London." "Your mother is hardly the first to voice that opinion." "She also says you will never marry, because you are far too proud to find happiness." Ada inclined her head slightly, her face free of malice, as though she were passing along practical intelligence rather than delivering a verdict. A sound left him, a sound he had not made in a very long time. A real laugh. Brief, unguarded, entirely genuine. She may well be right. Ada weighed his words for a moment, then, with the unfiltered honesty that belongs only to children and the very old, she looked up at him and announced, "When I am grown, I shall marry you." The warmth of that laughter still lingered behind his ribs. He offered her a small bow, the kind a gentleman gives when he means to honor a declaration without diminishing it. "Then I shall have the distinct privilege of awaiting your arrival, Miss Pemberton." She nodded once, satisfied, and turned back toward the stairs. At the top, she paused, glanced over her shoulder. "You should not stand near cold windows. You might catch a chill." Then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness above. Maximilian stood in the corridor a beat longer than he needed to. A single, private smile crossed his mouth, and he returned to the drawing room, the dinner party, the life already arranged around him like furniture in a house he had never truly chosen. By the following morning, he had forgotten her entirely. This is the part that matters. Ada Pemberton did not forget. 3 weeks after that dinner, she was enrolled at Miss Hartley's seminary for young ladies in Bath, an institution that prided itself on shaping women of refinement, composure, and suitable ambitions. The school occupied a handsome Georgian building on a quiet street, ringed by gardens that were lovely and completely off-limits to students from October through April. Bath was not London. Its fashionable circles skewed older, moved slower, carried a gentler pulse. Yet it sat far enough from Grosvenor Square that a 10-year-old girl could shelter a private thought without interrogation. and near enough to the civilized world that she could grow into something more. She did grow, year by year, season by season, with the same patient, deliberate quality that marked everything she undertook. She was not the prettiest girl at Miss Hartley's. Beauty existed in abundance there, arriving in every conceivable shape. But Ada possessed something rarer, something that outlasted mere prettiness by decades. She consumed books the way others consumed air. Her reasoning emerged, precise, layered, deliberate. And she had mastered the discipline of holding her tongue. Not from timidity, from the early understanding that knowing when to speak is its own kind of power. She considered Duke Maximilian Royce the way a sailor considers a star on the horizon, not with obsession, with navigation. He was never a daydream she had spun from loneliness or girlish fancy. He was a fixed coordinate she had chosen when she was far too young to choose wisely, and then confirmed that choice year after year with full intention. That was the part she never revealed to anyone, the choosing. She recognized, with the sharp pragmatism Miss Hartley's seminary for young ladies had labored to instill, and had, perhaps by accident, actually succeeded in cultivating, that he would not remember her. A man of the Duke of Ashvale's position moved through society like a river carving through terrain. He shaped everything around him. He retained nothing of the individual stones. She had been a child of 10, glimpsed for a moment in a corridor. She was not foolish enough to imagine she had left any impression beyond a fleeting, mild pleasantry. But she was coming back to London. Her parents had settled on the 1810 season for her debut. The letters arriving from her mother through the winter of 1809 thrummed with preparations, arrangements, and the unmistakable, half-breathless excitement of a woman who had waited years to launch her daughter into the world, and could now see the threshold approaching. Ada read these letters in her room at Miss Hartley's, by the window, with a stillness her mother would have found deeply suspicious had she been there to witness it. She felt no dread about the season, no nervousness over the dinners, the assemblies, the parade of potential suitors. Her mind circled one single point, and that point was this: she would see him again. And whatever followed from that moment, whatever the living man proved to be against the architecture of memory, whatever distance separated reality from a decade of quiet certainty, she would finally know. She would have her answer. She packed her trunk at the end of March 1810 with the precision of a woman who had no plans to come back. 10 years. She had waited an entire decade. And patience, she had learned within those seminary walls, was nothing like resignation. Patience was simply waiting with your eyes open. The Duke of Ashvale had not softened his position on marriage. If anything, he had hardened it. He was 40 years old in the spring of 1810. 40, a number his mother, the Dowager Duchess, had evidently marked as a line in the sand. She made her position unmistakable at breakfast in January, with the serene conviction of someone announcing rain. Maximilian, for his part, was absorbed in his correspondence, wanting nothing more than to be left in peace. Quote 13, quote 14. He did not raise his eyes from his papers. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 15, underscore, underscore, Maximilian. His name on his mother's lips carried a specific weight that, even at 40, still forced him to attend. You need an heir. The estate demands continuity, and quite frankly, I have grown tired of inventing explanations for your solitary place at dinner tables. He lowered his papers, met her gaze with the expression he kept for conversations he meant to end quickly. "I am too old," he said, each word placed with surgical care, "to begin the business of choosing a bride. The window has closed. The proper season for such endeavors ended 15 years ago, and I simply failed to notice." The Dowager Duchess held his stare for a long, measured beat. "That," she said finally, "is the most convenient lie you have ever told yourself." And she left the room, deploying the most devastating weapon in her arsenal. He sat with her parting words far longer than pride would allow him to admit. He was no stranger to his own tactics. A sharp, discerning nature had lived in him since boyhood, and the years had only honed its edge. He knew, with the clarity of a man who refuses to look away from mirrors, that his cynicism was architecture, stone upon stone, mortared with every season he had passed through without finding the thing he could not yet name.
He understood his mother was right.
He simply found it easier to lie to himself about it. The spring season opened in April. He attended, as he always attended, the assemblies, the dinners, the afternoon calls. He moved through them with the practiced exhaustion of a man skilled at presence without proximity. He offered smiles. He danced once each evening, typically with the hostess or her eldest daughter, whoever would take the most pleasure and draw the least false hope from the gesture. He departed before midnight. The same pattern year upon year. A flawless performance of engagement that had, somewhere along the way, become impossible to distinguish from genuine disinterest. Lady Whitmore's spring dinner fell on the 22nd of April. It marked the 14th time Maximilian had attended that particular gathering at that particular house. He arrived. He became the immediate object of attention. He endured it. Then he sought the library, a stolen interval of quiet between the soup and the fish courses, when the butler materialized in the doorway. Quote 21, the man announced, projecting his voice as though addressing the entire household. Quote 22, two young women followed him in from the anteroom. Maximilian glanced up from the title page of a book he had not begun to read. She was the one on the left, dark hair, neatly arranged, not loose. A certain defiance in the angle of her jaw, a particular quality to her stillness. It struck him like a word rising to the tip of the tongue, familiar, undeniable, yet refusing to fully surface. She was 20 years of age, composed with the deliberate grace of a woman who had spent years refining that very quality. And she was not looking at him. Her gaze rested on the bookshelves. He found this almost absurdly disarming. Every soul he had encountered across a full decade of seasons turned toward him the moment he entered a room, as though compelled by some invisible thread. This woman had entered a room he already occupied. The butler had made certain she knew it, and she had chosen instead to examine the spines of books. He watched her scan the titles with real curiosity. He caught the faint movement of her lips as she read them silently. He watched her tilt her head toward one volume in particular, as though it had whispered something worth considering. Her sister murmured something beside her. Then she turned, with unhurried elegance, and her eyes swept the room until they settled on him. No flutter, no coy pretense, simply recognition, or something that wore its face convincingly. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 23, underscore, underscore. The greeting was so precisely measured, it conveyed courtesy and absolutely nothing else. He inclined his head. 10 years spent in Bath. A pause. Something shifted inside him. Pemberton, Lady Whitmore's niece. He turned the arithmetic over in his mind, like pressing a key into a lock that nearly fits, feeling the tumblers resist, almost catch, then hold still. He did not reach the answer. Not yet. Instead, he found himself standing in the library of Whitmore House, an unopened book in hand, while Ada Pemberton regarded him with 20-year-old eyes that seemed to expect something he had not yet realized he owed. He thought about her for 3 days after that dinner. This surprised him considerably. He was not a man given to dwelling on people. They encountered one another 7 times over the following 3 weeks. Maximilian counted each occasion, then grew irritated with himself for counting. The Hargreave Ball on the 1st of May, the afternoon concert at Mrs. Drummond's residence on the 7th, a chance encounter at Hatchard's on the 9th. He had walked in, searching for political pamphlets, and found her at the far end of the fiction section, absorbed in a volume she made no move to set down when he appeared. He had to clear his throat. She glanced up without a flicker of self-consciousness and asked what he thought of Fielding. He held no particular opinion on the matter, yet somehow he found himself constructing one. He started accepting invitations he had previously refused. First, he told himself it was coincidence, then curiosity, then a sensible broadening of his social commitments. By the third lie, he had stopped trying to persuade himself of anything at all and simply showed up. The other young ladies of the season noticed. His mother noticed. The men at his club made pointed remarks he parried with ease. He had 2 decades of practice deflecting such things. Society, that single breathing organism, observed that the Duke of Ashvale, the man who had pronounced himself too old and too finished to begin anything new, was materializing with unsettling frequency wherever a certain Miss Pemberton happened to be. Society found this enormously entertaining, as it always does. Ada, for her part, gave him almost nothing to work with. This, he was slowly realizing, was entirely deliberate. She was pleasant in the way of a sharp woman who elects to be pleasant. Present, attentive, sincerely engaged in conversation. Yet she granted him not a single extra degree of anything. No surplus warmth, no performed availability, no loaded glances designed to invite pursuit. She treated him with flawless consistency as exactly what he was, a gentleman she had encountered at a dinner party. Nothing more. She gave no sign of registering the pointed attention he kept directing her way. He found this maddening in a fashion he could not properly name. It was at the Ashworth Musicale, on the 14th of May, that he finally contrived to seat himself beside her long enough for a real conversation. The musicale was the sort of gathering where the music functioned chiefly as a pretext, an excuse for 50 people to occupy a single room and speak volumes with their eyes while pretending to attend to a soprano. He had claimed the aisle seat next to her before she grasped his intent, and this afforded him a small, probably undeserved, flicker of satisfaction. Quote 26. Her voice was low. She did not look at him. The soprano was navigating an opening passage. Quote 27. His reply came just as quietly. She said nothing. The soprano launched into Handel, a ceremonial piece, perhaps too grave for the mood of the room. Around them, listeners arranged their features into masks of deep concentration, as though laboring to appear enraptured. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 29, underscore, underscore, he said. 10 years, from 1800. It was a statement of fact, not an inquiry, and she received it as one. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 30, underscore, underscore. He turned the number over in his mind. He had been 30 in 1800. He had gone to Lady Whitmore's dinner in October of that year. A corridor, guttering candles. A 10-year-old girl in a white nightgown, dark hair loose around her shoulders, standing at the top of the servants' staircase. He turned toward her. She was watching the soprano. Her profile held perfect composure, utterly still, betraying nothing. And yet there was a quality to that stillness, something that did not quite deserve the word. Quote, 31. Quote, that made the fine hairs along his forearms rise. Quote, 32. Quote, a pause. Quote, 33. Quote, a beat. Not hesitation, a choice being made. Then she turned her head and looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that had kept their patience for 10 years. Quote, 34. Quote, she said. Quote, 35. Quote, and she returned her gaze to the music. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the dark of Ashvale House in Berkeley Square, staring at the ceiling, pulling at a thread of memory he could not quite catch hold of. Something in a corridor, the smell of candle wax, a laugh that had startled him, a voice carrying a composure far too steady for its age. He finally seized the thread at 4 in the morning. It came apart all at once, the whole tangled thing, and he remembered. A small girl, barefoot, possessed of a gravity no child should carry so naturally, dark hair spilling around her shoulders, gazing up at him with that identical quality of stillness Ada Pemberton carried into every room she entered. Speaking without a shred of self-consciousness, without the faintest awareness that what she said was extraordinary. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 36, underscore, underscore. And he, laughing, had promised to wait. A jest, nothing more. He lay motionless for a long while, turning that memory over in his mind, examining its edges. He had laughed and let it go. She, at 10 years old, had done what? Held it close? Made it a compass bearing? He had no way of knowing. Because she had offered him nothing. Nothing except that solitary word. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 37, underscore, underscore. Spoken with the patience of someone who had been rehearsing precisely that kind of restraint for years. He told himself it meant nothing. Children make grand declarations and forget them by tea time. He settled this conclusion with absolute certainty, then lay awake until dawn crept across the ceiling, his thoughts circling back to her hands. How carefully she had arranged them in her lap during the evening's exchange, and that peculiar habit she had of studying bookshelves when she thought no one was watching. Lady Drummond's garden party on the 28th of May was exactly the sort of afternoon the English social calendar seemed to have invented for one purpose alone, pressing people together while offering no legitimate excuse for private conversation. The grounds overflowed with guests. Perhaps 80 of them drifted across immaculate lawns beneath a sky that had, for once in late May, committed itself entirely to cooperation. Small tables bore lemonade and delicate pastries, both largely ignored. At the far edge, near the roses, a string quartet played something that floated agreeably over the grass, pleasant enough to appreciate, undemanding enough to disregard. It was there, among the wisteria, that Maximilian found Ada. She stood, turned slightly from the crowd, her gaze fixed on the climbing vine with a degree of genuine attention he had come to recognize. That same concentrated absorption she brought to every subject she examined. so utterly unlike the polite, hollow interest most people extended to the world around them. Clara was somewhere across the lawn, caught up in conversation with a cluster of younger guests. For the first time in his memory of Ada, she was unaccompanied. He was walking toward her before the decision had fully formed. She turned. Sunlight struck her face directly, and she did not raise a hand against it, simply stood in the brightness. In that small, unremarkable gesture, something behind his ribs pulled taut, a sensation he could not name. Quote, 38, he began. She waited, composure utterly intact. He wanted to say something direct, something honest, something that might span the distance between what he now understood and her careful, practiced silence. Instead, he asked whether she found the wisteria pleasing. The corner of her mouth shifted, not quite a smile,
but its nearest neighbor.
Quote 39, she said. Quote 40, he looked at the wisteria, then back at her. Quote 41, quote 42, she replied. No apology in it, just a statement of fact. Silence settled between them. The sort of silence that, like all their silences of late, contained far more than absence. Around them, the party whirled on. Laughter, performance, the bright machinery of society. Neither of them acknowledged it. Quote 43, he said. The words had not been planned. They surfaced on their own, and he let them go. Quote 44. A faint shift crossed her expression. Not surprise, its opposite. A deep quiet fell over her. The kind that belongs to someone who has been waiting for exactly this, and now meets it without flinching. She held his gaze for a long, weighted moment, the silence between them thick with things neither could easily name. Quote 45, she said. Her voice was even,
Giving nothing away.
Quote 46, quote 47, she answered plainly. Quote 48, quote, the question clawed at the inside of his chest. He wanted to speak it aloud, to ask her directly. Did you mean it? Does it still hold true? Did you come back to London on the strength of a promise I tossed carelessly into a corridor when you were 10 years old, and I was too blind to understand that words spoken to you might take root and endure? He said none of it. 4 decades of practiced restraint had made direct questions feel like baring one's throat in the middle of a siege. Instead, he managed, I hope your time in Bath was, that is, I hope it was a beneficial decade. It was, she confirmed. That near smile surfaced again, sharper now, carrying a faintly instructive edge. Their moment fractured, as their moments so often did, by the intrusion of others carrying their own purposes. Lady Ashworth appeared with a young lord in tow who required an introduction. The closeness that had gathered between them, scattered like mist, pulled through a window, left ajar. And yet Maximilian lingered in the garden long after Ada had been drawn away. His gaze rested on the wisteria. He turned the word instructive over in his mind. What it meant when offered by a woman who chose every syllable with the deliberateness of someone who understood precisely what her words were worth. By the first week of June, quiet speculation had hardened into common knowledge. The Duke of Ashvale was courting Miss Ada Pemberton. This conclusion, correct in its direction though imprecise about its origins, provoked exactly the range of reactions one might expect. Mothers of unmarried daughters absorbed the news with muted disappointment. Young men, who had begun circling Ada with tentative interest, now pressed harder, sensing by instinct that the window they had noticed might close sooner than they had supposed.
Lady Whitmore moved through her days
With an unmistakable air of vindication, claiming quiet credit for a connection she had neither engineered nor, in truth, would have foreseen. Ada's mother arrived from the country during the second week of June. She had been summoned by a string of carefully composed yet conspicuously evasive letters from Lady Whitmore, the kind that could only mean something consequential. The moment she stepped through the door, she read the situation with the practiced eye of a woman who had watched society's machinery turn for 30 years. At the first opportunity, she linked her arm through her daughter's and asked for a frank account. Ada paused, not from reluctance, but from the habit of thinking before she spoke. Quote 52, she said at last. Quote 53, her mother waited. Quote 54, quote 55, her mother observed, practical as ever. Ada replied, her tone measured, reflective. Her mother studied her daughter, 20 years old now, a decade of quiet endurance behind her, and that unmistakable thread of resolve that had been visible even at 10, even shivering in corridors in nothing but a nightgown. She said nothing. Sometimes silence is answer enough. Elsewhere, a young viscount by the name of Hereford had resolved to set caution aside. Lord Edmund Hereford, 28 years of age, possessed an easy handsomeness, a comfortable estate in Shropshire, and a temperament that could be generously called uncomplicated, or, less generously,
simple.
through those opening weeks of the season, he had watched Ada from a careful distance. Then, steadily, over the following fortnight, he closed that distance. By the 9th of June, a card party at Greystone, his intentions had grown so unmistakable that Ada could not have pretended otherwise. He took the chair beside her at the card table. He stayed for 3 hours. He was attentive, engaging, genuinely curious about her thoughts, and remarkably unafraid to speak his own. Ada found herself liking him, truly liking him. Lord Hereford carried an ease about him that Maximilian conspicuously lacked, a warmth offered freely, without requiring excavation from beneath years of carefully mortared emotional walls. Maximilian arrived late to the card party. It took him roughly 30 seconds to understand the scene before him. He had never regarded himself as a jealous man. This was a belief forged over 4 decades of simply never encountering the emotion. He discovered, standing in the doorway of the Greystone card room, watching Lord Hereford lean close to murmur something that drew laughter from Ada, that his long-held conviction had merely been waiting for the right provocation. What surged through him was deeply unsettling. Not an emotion he could manage with composure, not one he could disarm with a well-turned phrase. It lodged itself somewhere beneath his ribs, like a spark struck from flint. He played cards on the far side of the room. He conversed. He smiled when smiling was expected. And every 10 minutes, his gaze drifted across the room to find Lord Hereford still there, Ada still laughing. And the burning behind his sternum did not fade. He left at 11 without speaking to her. He walked home through the dimming June evening, reaching Ashvale House in a state of mind he was too proud to name, but too perceptive to misunderstand. He withdrew to his study, settled into the chair behind his desk, and for the first time, without flinching, he examined the path he had chosen for himself. He was 40 years old. He had told his mother, told himself, told anyone who asked that the right moment had long since passed. He had built a remarkably comfortable fortress of resignation around his life and dwelled inside it for years, enjoying, if not happiness exactly, then at least immunity from the particular misery of wanting what one cannot possess. And now there was Ada Pemberton, 20 years old, with a declaration made at 10 still hovering somewhere in the unspoken air between them. And there was a young Viscount, open, uncomplicated, who would give her a simple life filled with simple affection. He wanted her, not as some abstract ideal, not as a pleasant distraction from an otherwise predictable season. He wanted her specifically, precisely, the way she tilted her head over a book, the deliberateness with which she chose her words, the sharpness of her attention when she studied wisteria, her absolute refusal to grant him anything he had not earned. He had been circling this truth for 6 weeks. He was done circling. The question now was what he meant to do about it, and whether a decade of deliberate inaction had already cost him his chance. On the morning of June the 15th, the Pemberton household received significant news. Lord Edmund Hereford had sent a formal letter to Ada's father, who was away from London and expected back within the week, declaring his serious interest in Ada. Nothing was official, no decisions had been made, but the letter existed, and Lady Whitmore delivered its contents to Ada over breakfast, with a proprietary satisfaction in her manner, as though the mere closing of a chapter constituted an ending worth celebrating. Ada read the letter. She set it down. She finished her breakfast. She thought of Lord Hereford and his uncomplicated warmth, his estate in Shropshire, where wisteria probably wound around perfectly sensible trellises, asking nothing difficult of anyone. She considered how such a life might genuinely be a wonderful one. And then her mind turned to Maximilian Royce, the man who had remembered her at 4 in the morning, a full 3 weeks after that musical performance, and who had apologized for the lateness of his own recollection. The same man who, for 6 weeks running, had orbited her with the careful restraint of someone unsure whether he had any right to draw near. A man who had declared himself, publicly, repeatedly, with almost theatrical conviction, far too old to be choosing a bride. And yet, in that very same breath, had appeared wherever she happened to be, with the reliable certainty of a compass swinging north. She had been patient long enough. The Langley afternoon reception on the 16th of June was a sprawling, unhurried affair. Some 30 guests were scattered between 2 drawing rooms and a conservatory, the kind of gathering where private conversations could unfold without attracting notice. Ada arrived alongside her sister and mother, exchanged pleasantries with a handful of acquaintances, and then, when the right moment presented itself, slipped toward the conservatory. She knew he would be there. Maximilian always gravitated toward the quieter margins of any social event, and conservatories offered the most fortifiable of those margins. He stood near the palm trees, his gaze directed through the glass at the small, walled garden beyond. He turned when she entered. Something shifted across his features. Relief, she decided, or something very close to it. Then, his habitual composure settled back into place, smooth as a curtain being drawn. She stopped a few feet from him. The conservatory was empty of other guests. Beyond the glass, the garden stretched green and still in the afternoon light. "I need to say something to you," she began, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." A single nod. She drew a breath, not from nerves, but from the sharp, gathered focus that defined everything she did. "Did I come back to London because of you?" she went on. "Not entirely. The season was always the plan. I was always going to come. But I came willingly, without dread, because for 10 years, the one thing I most wanted was to stand in the same room as you at the age of 20 and determine whether what I felt at 10 was a child's invention or something real." He was extraordinarily still. "I have spent 6 weeks now in your company, and the answer is that it was real, which is an inconvenience. I'm well aware of the inconvenience. I'm also aware that you are 40 years old and have thoroughly, publicly, and with remarkable consistency decided that you are too old and too fixed in your habits for any of this." Her gaze held his, steady and unyielding. "And yet here you are, precise, deliberate. Lord Hereford has communicated his intentions to my father. He arrives from the country this week. I have made no decision, and I will not make one without a pause, a moment to think, a clean beginning. I have waited 10 years for you to truly see me, not the child in the corridor, me. And I am standing here now, saying exactly what I mean, because I have used up every last measure of patience I had." Her voice dropped, not in volume, but in heat, a flame burning lower without going out. "So," she said, "choose me now, or let me go." Silence filled the conservatory. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door swung open. Laughter spilled briefly from the drawing room, bright and distant. Then the door closed. Quiet returned. He looked at her, and she watched something profound rearrange itself behind his eyes. She could not name the process exactly, but she could not deny it either. 40 years of painstakingly constructed detachment, meeting something it had never been built to withstand. He opened his mouth, closed it again. An expression crossed his face, unguarded, almost raw, something she had never once seen there before. And then he spoke her name. Nothing else. "Ada!" The word came stripped of every trace of composure. "You were 10 years old." His voice carried a rough edge she had never heard from him. You could not have decided at 10, she said. "I decided at 10, and I decided again at 15, and at 18, and I reached my decision this morning, before I ever set foot in this room." Her gaze did not waver. "How many times must someone choose the same path before it carries real weight?" He gave no answer. She hadn't expected one. Not yet. Not while the full gravity of her words still hung between them. She let the silence do its work. "I will be at Lady Whitmore's residence tonight. Then my father arrives. And after that, I remember everything. The candles. You told me not to stand beside cold windows lest I fall ill. I have turned that over in my mind every single day for 6 weeks, and I did not understand what it meant until roughly 2 hours ago. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 7, 4, underscore, underscore. I laughed. "You said something true." And I laughed. And I forgot. And I have been a fool for 10 years in ways I am only now beginning to count. I am 40 years old. I have spent a great deal of energy persuading myself and everyone around me that wanting something was no longer a possibility available to me. I was wrong. Specifically and completely wrong about this. About you. I told you I would wait for you. I said it as a jest in a corridor when I was 30. Foolish, unaware of what those words truly carried. I would like to say it now. and mean it. If you will permit me to. I have been waiting 10 years for this. Will you permit me to speak with your father when he arrives? Yes. You should return upstairs. It is past midnight, and I have already compromised your reputation by approximately 10 different measures. You knocked on the front door
At midnight.
without a hat. My mother is going to be insufferable about this. Mine already is, Your Grace. You ought to have a hat made for such waiting. You'll catch a chill. His gaze held hers. Here stood a woman, barely 20, who had carried the weight of a 10-year-old's earnest vow across an entire decade, and was now handing it back to him, intact, unhurried. A rare openness settled over his features, an expression almost no one had ever witnessed. I shall have several made, he answered. They were wed in August, a quiet ceremony held in the chapel at Ashvale Park, Maximilian's ancestral country estate in Wiltshire. The wisteria along the southern wall had been winding itself into the old stones since 1743, and displayed no intention of stopping. The Dowager Duchess wept, something she might have called undignified under any other circumstance, had she not been so thoroughly overjoyed. Ada's mother wept harder still, having long ago decided such a display was entirely her right. Lord Edmund Hereford sent a letter of gracious congratulations, which Ada read carefully and then set aside. Her respect for him remained whole. He was, she reflected, exactly what he appeared to be, a rare thing among many. She hoped sincerely that he would find someone who truly deserved his regard. Society, as it always does, began its murmuring. They called it the most peculiar match of the decade. The Duke of Ashvale, a man who had declared himself too old to choose a bride, marrying a woman 20 years his junior, the niece of Lady Whitmore, a graduate of Miss Hartley's seminary in Bath, a woman possessing no great fortune and no remarkable lineage, save for the one she had quietly,
Steadily cultivated.
over the course of 10 years. Their pronouncements came swiftly, then softened by degrees, and eventually fell silent altogether. Every soul who crossed paths with the Duke and Duchess of Ashvale carried away the same quiet revelation. The man who had built his entire existence upon an architecture of impenetrable composure, in her presence, was simply wholly at rest. His laughter had changed. The way he inhabited a room had shifted at its foundation. Those fortress walls he'd spent a lifetime constructing were not merely crumbling. They were being replaced by open windows, the kind that appear only when a person finally surrenders to what they have wanted all along. Ada needed no one to tell her this. She lived inside this transformation every single day, and it remained as true, as staggering as it had been on that one decisive night. September light filled the library at Ashvale House. She was lost in a book. He attended to his correspondence. Around them settled that particular quality of silence that belongs only to two people who have woven their lives into a single fabric. Then, without preamble, he looked up and spoke. She lifted her gaze from the page. As I understand it, that is a very tender age to make such a commitment. It is, she acknowledged, regarding him across the room with that same unshakable self-possession she had carried through 10 winters in Bath and one unforgettable London season. But I reaffirm it every year. Surely that counts for something. He studied her, this man who had, with the painstaking grace of someone unlearning a lifelong discipline, taught himself to let his feelings simply rise to the surface. "It counts for everything," he said. A smile opened across her face. Not the careful, measured expression she had deployed throughout the season. A full smile, unguarded and warm, the one she had kept in reserve for him alone. He folded the letter before him, set it aside. His afternoon's correspondence was finished, and with it, every competing claim on his attention. Even now, months deep into their marriage, this was the thing she treasured most about being his wife. The man who had spent 40 years perfecting distance had learned, with remarkable skill, the art of truly arriving. Beyond the library windows, London moved through its autumn rituals. The social season had ended. Its assemblies and balls, its card parties, and meticulous performances of availability, all of it folded away until the following year. Autumn was sweeping down from the north, brushing the park's leaves with russet and copper, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. That particular English light settled over everything, the kind that turns an ordinary scene into something worthy of a painter's hand. Inside the library, the Duchess of Ashvale returned to her novel. The Duke of Ashvale returned to his letters. But after barely 4 minutes, he abandoned them again. He rose, crossed the room, and settled beside his wife on the settee. Before the summer of 1810, this would have been unthinkable for the 9th Duke of Ashvale. Now he performed it with the effortless ease of a man who has finally located his true home. She rested her head against his shoulder, eyes still tracing the page. He received the gesture without a word, a language complete unto itself. Some promises are made at 30 and honored for a lifetime. Some declarations ring true at 10 and grow only more resonant at 20. And some affections are so steady, so precise, so unmistakably clear from their very first moment, that the years between serve not as delay, but simply as the time required for the slower of two hearts to finally catch up. By the time Ada and Maximilian settled into life at Ashvale Park, the wisteria on its southern facade had been climbing for 67 years. It had long passed the point where one could distinguish stone from vine. Certain bonds grow so deeply intertwined that the question itself ceases to matter. This, in the end, was exactly what Ada had known